For 5 years, the world watched the line with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. Journalists wrote careful articles hedging their assessments. Architects gave diplomatic interviews about challenges and ambitious timelines. Engineers spoke anonymously about concerns they couldn't voice publicly. Ever young, non nobody saith Italiano. Until January 2026, The Nation, one of America's oldest and most respected progressive publications, published an article with a headline that stopped the careful dance of diplomatic language. The line, "A Saudi Megaproject is dead. Not struggling. Not facing challenges. Not being reassessed. Dead." 4 words that said what thousands of professionals had whispered in private conversations, what analysts had implied in carefully worded reports, what skeptics had shouted into the void since 2021. The dream was over. The vision had failed. The most ambitious urban project in human history had become the most expensive failure in human history. And finally, someone with a platform said it plainly. But this article wasn't just a declaration of death. It was an autopsy, a detailed examination of how the line died, wokalidit, and what corpses were left behind. What the Nation revealed went far beyond construction delays and budget overruns. It exposed a system of human suffering, professional complicity, and institutional failure that implicates some of the world's most prestigious companies. This is the story of the article that finally told the truth, and the truth it told was far worse than anyone had publicly acknowledged. Let's be precise about what the Nation published. The article, written in January 2026, didn't merely report on construction problems. It connected the line to a broader pattern of human costs that had been systematically underreported. The first, devastating claim: the line was never about urban innovation. The article argued that the line was always primarily a vanity project, a paper robbery that existed to generate impressive images and international attention, rather than functional urban space. The glossy renderings, the promotional videos, the architectural manifestos were the product, not the city itself. This wasn't cynical speculation. It was an assessment based on the project's trajectory, from 170 kilometers to 2.4 kilometers, from 9 million residents to 300,000, from revolutionary urban concept to whatever could be salvaged from $50 billion of sunk costs. The second devastating claim: the human costs, were staggering. The Nation cited an ITV documentary that estimated more than 21,000 workers had died or disappeared under Saudi Vision in 2030, the megaproject program that includes Niam and the line. 21,000 people, not injuries, not hospitalizations, deaths and disappearances. This number, if accurate, would make Vision 2030 one of the deadliest construction programs in modern history. It would dwarf the worker death tolls that generated international outrage during Qatar's World Cup preparations. The third devastating claim: Western firms enabled everything. The article named names. AECOM, the massive architecture and construction firm that was managing the line's structural logistics. Morphosis, Tom Main's award-winning architecture practice. Pei Cobb Freed, successor to the legendary IM Pei. These weren't obscure contractors. These were some of the most respected names in Western architecture and construction, firms that had built reputations on landmark projects worldwide. According to the Nation, they lent their prestige to a project that displaced indigenous communities, imprisoned and resulted in death sentences for people who refused to leave their homes. The fourth devastating claim: the Huaytat tribe paid the ultimate price. The article described how the construction of the line occasioned a horrific program of forced displacement beginning in 2021. Members of the Huaytat tribe, who had lived in the Tavuk region for centuries, were forced from their ancestral lands. Those who resisted faced imprisonment, some faced execution. The Nation connected the line directly to these human rights violations, not as unfortunate side effects, but as integral to the project's execution. This was the article's core argument. The line wasn't just a failed construction project. It was a human rights catastrophe enabled by Western prestige and funded by oil wealth, dressed up in architectural renderings to distract from the suffering beneath. Let's pause on the most shocking claim in the Nation's article: more than 21,000 workers estimated to have died or disappeared under Saudi Vision's 2030. This number comes from an ITV documentary that investigated conditions across Saudi Arabia's Megaproject program. It wasn't specific to the line alone, but encompassed the broader Vision 2030 construction boom. To understand the scale, consider comparisons. Qatar's World Cup construction, which generated years of international criticism and calls for boycotts, resulted in an estimated 6,500 worker deaths. Over a decade of construction, according to The Guardian's investigation. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 program, according to the ITV estimate, has resulted in more than 3 times that number. How is this possible? First, scaling. Vision 2030 encompasses dozens of megaprojects across Saudi Arabia. Niam, The Line, Qiddiya, the Red Sea Project, Dirija, Gay, New Moraba, and many others. The construction workforce at peak numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Second, duration. Vision 2030 has been under construction since 2016, a full decade of continuous building activity. Third, conditions. Human Rights Watch has documented systematic abuses of migrant workers on Saudi wage theft, passport confiscation, dangerous working conditions, limited access to health care, extreme heat exposure. Saudi Arabia's summer temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius. Construction workers, many from South Asian countries, labor in conditions that can cause heat stroke, organ failure, and death. Fourth, transparency. Saudi Arabia does not publish comprehensive worker death statistics. The 21,000 figure is an estimate based on available data, embassy reports, and investigative journalism. The actual number could be higher or lower, but the lack of official transparency makes verification impossible. The nation's decision to cite this number was significant. It connected the line's architectural ambitions directly to a body count. Every gleaming render, every promotional video, every architectural award was implicitly linked to workers who would never return home. This framing was intentional. It forced readers to see the line not as a failed urban experiment, but as a human catastrophe with aesthetic protection. The Nation's article didn't let Western firms escape responsibility. It named specific companies that participated in the line, arguing that their involvement lent legitimacy to a project built on human rights violations. AECOM, the global infrastructure giant, was handling structural logistics for the line. The company also works on defense contracts and, as the Nation noted, was involved in structural planning for projects associated with both Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu's controversial Gaza 2035 master plan. Morphosis, founded by Pritzker Prize winner Tom Main, was described as part of the usual suspects of neoliberal future. The firm's involvement in the line connected one of architecture's highest honors to a project that had displaced indigenous communities. Pei Cobb Freed, the successor firm to Pei's legendary practice, was also named. Pei designed some of the 20th century's most celebrated buildings, including the Louvre Pyramid and the Bank of China Tower. His firm's legacy was now linked to the line. The article's framing was devastating. These firms inherited the city-building impulses of modernism, but applied them in service of an authoritarian regime's vanity project. This wasn't the first time questions had been raised about Western architectural complicity with Niam. Norman Foster, one of the world's most famous architects, had quietly withdrawn from Niam projects. Francine Oben, the celebrated Dutch architect, had distanced herself. Several firms had declined to discuss their NEOM involvement, or had stopped promoting their participation. But many firms stayed. Many continued working. Many continued accepting payments from the Saudi Public Investment Fund, while the Huwaitid tribe faced eviction, imprisonment, and death sentences. The Nation's article asked a simple question. How do these firms justify their involvement? The answer, implied throughout the article, was equally simple. Money. The line offered fees that smaller projects couldn't match. The Saudi Public Investment Fund had nearly $1 trillion in assets. For architecture firms competing in a global market, the temptation was overwhelming. Professional ethics, it seemed, had a price point, and Saudi Arabia could afford it. The Nation's article connected the line to specific human victims. Chief among them, Abdul Rahim Al-Huwaiti was a 43-year-old member of the Huwaitid tribe who lived in Al-Kariba, a village in Tabak province, directly in the line's path. When Saudi authorities demanded residents evacuate their homes to make way for Niyam al-Huwaiti refused. He didn't refuse quietly. He posted videos on social media, documenting the forced evictions, criticizing the lack of compensation, and accusing the Saudi government of state terrorism. In a kingdom where public criticism of royal projects is effectively prohibited, al-Huwaiti's videos were acts of extraordinary courage. On April 13, 2020, Saudi special forces surrounded his home. According to eyewitness accounts cited by human rights organizations, he was executed in his home without meaningful resistance. The Saudi government kept his body for weeks before returning it to his family. The case was closed without independent investigation. Al-Huwaiti became a martyr for those opposing Niyam. His face appeared on protest materials. His videos continued circulating online. His death became synonymous with the human cost of the line. But Al-Huwaiti was not the only victim. His brothers and cousins faced prosecution for continuing to resist eviction. 3 members of the Huwaitat tribe, Shadli Ibrahim and Atala al-Huwaiti, were sentenced to death in 2022 for terrorism charges related to their opposition to Niyam. Their sentences were upheld on appeal. 2 others, Suleiman and Moussa al-Huwaiti, received death sentences and subsequently disappeared. Human rights organizations have been unable to confirm their status. At least 47 members of the Huwaiti tribe have been arrested or detained. Some received prison sentences of up to 50 years for social media posts criticizing the project. The United Nations Human Rights Council expressed alarm at the sentences. UN experts contacted the Saudi government, the Public Investment Fund, NEOM, and 18 foreign companies involved in the project. Nothing changed. The Nation's article forced readers to hold these facts alongside the architectural renderings. The mirrored walls of the line were built on land taken by force. The foundations were poured while tribal members sat in prison. The promotional videos were released while families awaited execution dates for their relatives. Articles criticizing the line have appeared before. What made the nation's peace different? Timing. The article appeared in January 2026, after a cascade of events that made denial impossible. September 2025. The Saudi Public Investment Fund formally suspended construction on the line. November 2025, CEO Nadmi El-Nasir departed amid reports of deliberate manipulation of finances. January 2026. The 2029 Asian Winter Games at Trigina were cancelled indefinitely. January 2026. The Financial Times reported that the line would be radically redesigned into something far smaller than originally planned, possibly pivoting toward data centers. By the time The Nation published, the line's death wasn't speculation, it was documented fact. The article's title, "The Line, a Saudi Megaproject, is Dead," wasn't hyperbole. It was accurate. But more importantly, the article appeared at a moment when the world was ready to hear the truth. For years, the line had enjoyed a kind of protective fascination. Media outlets covered it with wonder, even when expressing skepticism. Could this work? Was the question not should this exist? The architectural press celebrated the designs, while noting challenges. Business publications analyzed the economics, while maintaining neutrality. Even critical coverage tended to focus on feasibility rather than ethics. The Nation broke this pattern. It declared the line not just failed, but morally bankrupt. It named the dead. It named the complicit. It demanded accountability. In doing so, it shifted the conversation from "can the line be built?" to "what have we allowed to happen?" That shift matters, because the line's failure doesn't end Saudi Arabia's megaproject ambitions. The 2034 World Cup is still scheduled. Other Niyam components continue development. Vision 2030 continues consuming resources and lives. The Nation's article established a framework for evaluating these projects, not by their renderings, but by their human costs. Not by their ambitions, but by their victims. If that framework takes hold, future megaprojects may face scrutiny that the line largely escaped until it was too late. The Nation's article raised an uncomfortable question. Why did it take so long for a major publication to say the line was dead? The signs had been visible for years. The engineering impossibilities were documented. The human rights violations were reported. The financial problems were analyzed. Yet mainstream Western coverage remained largely descriptive rather than critical. Publications reported what NEOM announced. They repeated the official specifications. They included expert skepticism as a balance to promotional claims. This pattern, sometimes called access journalism, prioritizes maintaining relationships with powerful sources over adversarial investigation. Publications that harshly criticize Saudi Arabia risk losing access to Saudi officials, Saudi events, and Saudi advertising revenue. The financial incentives are significant. Saudi Arabia has invested heavily in Western media markets. The Public Investment Fund has stakes in major entertainment and media companies. Saudi advertising supports publications across the political spectrum. Investigative journalism requires resources that advertising revenue provides. Publications dependent on that revenue face implicit pressure to moderate criticism. Human rights organizations filled some of the gap. ALQST, based in London, documented Huwaita tribe persecutions in detail. Human Rights Watch published reports on migrant worker abuse. Amnesty International raised alarms about executions. But human rights reports reach limited audiences. They don't shape mainstream narrative the way major publications do. The result: 4 to 5 years. The line existed in a media environment where its failures were noted, but its fundamental legitimacy was rarely questioned. The Nation, a progressive publication less dependent on mainstream advertising, had more freedom to speak plainly. Its article demonstrated what journalism could have been doing all along. This isn't to condemn all coverage of the line. Many journalists worked under constraints they didn't choose. Many publications faced genuine economic pressure. Many individual pieces provided valuable information, but the overall pattern deserves examination. When a project displaces indigenous communities, imprisons dissidents, and causes thousands of worker deaths, could it work? Should not be the primary question. The primary question should be, who is this hurting, and who is responsible? The Nation asked that question. Most coverage did not. The Nation's article named the complicit, but complicity without consequences is merely documentation. What accountability, if any, will those involved face? For the architects and construction firms, almost certainly none. AECOM will continue receiving contracts worldwide. Morphosis will continue winning awards. Pei Cobb Freed will continue trading on its founder's legacy. Professional architecture organizations could theoretically censure members for participating in projects involving human rights violations. In practice, they rarely do. The American Institute of Architects, the Royal Institute of British Architects, and similar bodies have not taken meaningful action against firms working on NEOM. Individual architects who refused to participate, who walked away from lucrative contracts, who chose ethics over income, will receive no recognition for their choices. Architecture does not celebrate those who say no. For the consulting firms, similar impunity. McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, and other major consultancies provided strategic advice to NEOM. They helped legitimate a project that violated international human rights standards. They will face no professional consequences. Consulting firms have repeatedly assisted authoritarian regimes without penalty. McKinsey's work for Saudi Arabia, including projects that allegedly facilitated the identification of dissidents, has generated criticism, but not accountability. For Saudi Arabia, the kingdom faces no international sanctions related to NEOM. Saudi Arabia remains a G20 member. It hosts major international events. It maintains diplomatic relations with virtually every nation. Its oil remains essential to the global economy. The human rights violations documented at NEOM, the deaths, the imprisonments, the executions have not affected Saudi Arabia's international standing in any meaningful way. For the victims, nothing. Abdul Rahim al-Huwaiti remains dead. His family has received no justice. The Huwaita tribe members sentenced to death remain under sentence. Those imprisoned remain in prison. Those who died building the line remain dead. The Nation's article documented these facts. Documentation is not justice. The uncomfortable truth is that the line's death will not produce accountability. The money has been spent. The prestige has been accumulated. The careers have been advanced. The deaths have occurred. What remains is only the question of whether the next megaproject will be different. Every failed megaproject needs an epitaph. For the line, the nation provided one. Tens of thousands of people have died or suffered abject ruination in the service of a few glossy pictures. This sentence captures what the line ultimately was: an image-making exercise that consumed lives, a rendering engine that required human fuel, a vision that valued aesthetics over existence. The article concluded by noting that the line's shambolic failure was enabled by borrowed prestige, the reputation of Western firms that gave Saudi Arabia's vanity project the veneer of professional legitimacy. Without that prestige, the line would have been dismissed as fantasy from the start, a prince's daydream, an autocrat's indulgence. Instead, it was taken seriously. It attracted investment. It displaced communities. It killed workers. It imprisoned dissidents. And then it died anyway. This is the lesson the nation's article ultimately teaches. Prestige is not prediction. The involvement of famous architects doesn't make impossible projects possible. The backing of sovereign wealth funds doesn't change the laws of physics. The promotional videos don't reflect reality. What prestige does is create delay. It postpones the moment of reckoning. It allows projects to consume resources and lives longer than they otherwise would. The line consumed 5 years, $50 billion, and an uncounted number of human lives before anyone with a major platform declared it dead. How much less might it have consumed if that declaration had come earlier? We can only note that it didn't. The publications that could have spoken didn't. The firms that could have withdrawn didn't. The governments that could have objected didn't. And so the line lived longer than it should have, consumed more than it should have, destroyed more than it should have. Now it's dead. The nation said so. Others will eventually agree. But the dead don't come back. The years don't return. The money doesn't unspend. The suffering doesn't unhappen. The line is dead. Long live the memory of what it cost, and long live the hope that the next time someone proposes the impartial, someone with a platform will say so before the bodies pile up. Because someone always pays for visions, and it's never the visionaries.